and do my welcome. Okay, so we are now recording, and just to welcome you all to this week's Our Unlearning Hour, which is a decolonial discussion forum under the Katawi Andean and Amazonian Indigenous Arts and Humanities project. Now, collaborating with Otterbein University in the seed takeover. And Terry Hermson is here for that project, as you know, and I don't know if Kadeen is going to join
Yeah,
us today.
I can update you on the situation. They've been out filming because they're doing film about the show and about Kadeen's connection to the natural world. And one of the naturalists at a place called Mad Scientists was taking them around a wetlands and showing them prairie plants, and they got a little over committed. They are just getting back, as the text said, that and that she would have to join by phone.
Sure, that's
So
fine. And
yeah.
as we know, this is a pretty informal forum, and sometimes we have more people, sometimes we have fewer people. So the group sort of oscillates, and actually, it's wonderful because we bring in different voices and different perspectives. So yeah. So as we were just before we started recording, we were just sort of greeting everyone, and it seems like there are lots of connections this week in terms of Kadeen's visits to classes at Ohio State, um, ongoing conversations, discussions, and awareness about some broader issues like issues of land acknowledgement or climate change, that kind of connect back to our discussions. And then other types of work. So, for instance, Alice Chen is with us today, and she is also one of the curators for the Kausayu Kunchai Andean and Amazonian Indigenous Art and Cultural Artifacts Research Collection. And we work on ourselves, in terms of workshops and things like that allow us to sort of explore some of these topics and then bring them into direct application in the work that we do with our exhibit. So I'll just open it up and see kind of where it goes. Conversations were already underway, so I just wanted to allow those to segue into our official discussion.
Since I missed part of it, I'd like to be caught up on what you were talking about, Vicky, with the science versus can you be too scientific, and can we get lose something with the heavy science approach, or do we, we certainly need it. And that connects to some things that came up in your class, Michelle. So I just catch if we start back on that, I'd love to hear where you were going with that.
Sure, and I'd like to hear what came up in Michelle's class too. But I'll briefly talk about this. So Terry, I think you were away when I was talking about Kadeen coming to my class on Monday, and 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 she did engage the students, and this is after lunch. It's not an easy class to engage students in when they're ready to sleep. Um, but I was talking about the fact that um, some of them, and I've seen this in lots of different people, when you do things like we did at the Frank, and we go around and talk, people people say this is too touchy feely, I don't want to do this. I see a lot of people like that, and there were a couple of my students who um, who felt like that, but most of them felt like that it was really opening their minds. And when you're talking about, when I'm talking about too scientific, I'm thinking about braiding sweetgrass. Have you read Braiding Sweetgrass? Anything of Robin Wall Kimmerer? Her her training in science, it was sort of, she had to struggle to balance that with her feelings, her heritage, and she does it beautifully. And I recommend that book for my students too. So that's all.
I'll just because there was an incredible class. Both classes yesterday were great, but the thing that you made me think of when you were talking about that is some of the students in your class, Michelle, were saying, in indigenous world that everything's connected. That the sounds connects to the seeds, connects to the land, connects to language. And it made me think about our university and our education system that is so the opposite, where everything is divided. This subject is divided from that subject, and then kids in high school, or elsewhere, 55 minutes or 43 minutes. I've been in probably 150 different schools teaching poetry around the state, and it's just like, okay, you got 43 minutes. Now you got to go to math. Okay, then you've got to. I mean, to me, that is an ununified. It's actually building the opposite, building disconnection. And there was more about that, Michelle, but I just start with that because I think in some ways our educational system is programmed. If we're talking about unlearning, we don't have to unlearn this thing that we package everything into these disciplines that don't connect to each other. I'd love to see
Yeah,
some
no,
change.
this is a really good point. Like I always say that for anyone studying Andean and Amazonian studies, it's virtually impossible to do that without an interdisciplinary sort of approach, precisely because everything is interconnected. Kind of casting back onto ourselves, that the idea of disciplines and categories, specializations, is very much of a Western construct, and it's pretty recent also. We've sort of continued to go into that specialization type of direction. But also, Terry, the other part that you bring up about this has to do with the kind of the fractured nature of a little bit schizophrenic, like jumping from one subject to another subject. So one, not articulating the connections among those subjects, but then also this sort of like, I don't know. It does. It feels like, okay, now you have to go to math. Now you have to go to science. Now we're going to go to language. So that fragmented nature, I think, also has sort of an impact on the way that students sort of process or multitask or skip from one thing to another. And what is that doing to our neurological pathways in terms of like the type of compartmentalization that we internalize, right? As we think about things. So all of this casts back onto our own system. You're absolutely right. And not just what types of research interests we have, but how we go about, our engagement and our research, the types of questions that we ask, where we bump up against potential things that we consider to be limitations of our field, right? Where we should be potentially asking these much broader questions. Yeah.
Well, Howard Gardner at Harvard talked about multiple intelligences. And he talked about, the kinesthetic intelligence and the artistic, the musical. And the reality is in the school system is that those are kind of minimized. Music, it's off to the side. Art, it's off to the side. The intelligence that we focus on tends to be along the top lines of the scientific and the mathematical. And we even deal with language that way. So there's not only this discrete, we're going to go from math to language, we're going to go from language to science and from science to history, but we're going to minimize other subjects. And we don't bother to integrate the art into the math. We don't bother to, move music into math or music into the language arts. There's just no respect for it. And it seems to be, if you look at classical education, if you look, at the time of the Greeks, even when they were teaching, they would integrate subjects, but we don't do that anymore. And I think the reason we don't do that is because we have public policy that says, where are the jobs found? Well, the jobs are found in the maths and the sciences. So we've got to focus on the maths and the sciences. And everything now working our way into something that is so specialized that I think you're going to find students graduating who have no understanding of the classics. They have no understanding of integration. They have no understanding of anything other than cold, hard, statistical math and sciences. It's kind of sad when you think about it, and the unlearning, we have to unlearn that because, indigenous societies don't look at things so discretely, as discrete areas. They integrate and, integrate ideas. And, as teachers, we're actually discouraged from bringing too many different subjects or too many different disciplines into one subject. Okay, you can bring a little bit of art into math, but please don't bring too much, because we've got to get back to understanding, logarithms, and we've got to understand algebra, but don't bring too much art into it, or music.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a couple of things, right? Like we have plenty of research um, along the lines of how music, art, language actually improve, people's ability to work flexibly in different jobs and inspire, different types of science or mathematical observations and things like this, right? We have plenty of research to support how much more robust everything is when we include the arts, right? The idea of multiple intelligences, a couple of questions that come for me is how interesting that was a very present sort of methodology and awareness during particular decades in the K through 12, but not necessarily at the university levels, right? And then something has happened, where that has a little bit gone by the wayside. Like you say, it's been sort of minimized. But the other thing that brings, aside from connections among subjects, is also the introduction of different senses, like using different senses in our approach to education, right? And I think that also, kind of ebbs and flows. So on the other side of this, I also want to just sort of mention that it's almost like an oscillating thing, right? Like where we can open up to integrating all of these different things, but at the same time, we need to be developing our excellence in different areas, right? Whether it's our particular specialization. So when we think about how we strike that balance, of the conversation across disciplines or just as one big, sort of interrelated thing, it is kind of an interesting thing to think about how we would go about that in terms of our structures in our classes and things like that. And then maybe I'm throwing too many points, right? But the distinction, like it's almost this idea of like touchy-feely as a stereotype of things, right? It's a negative perception or a perception that establishes some sort of distance vis-a-vis certain types of practices, right? So how to go about changing that perception, right? And that in a way, it has to do with some aspect of maybe translation writ large, right? Some of the yachaks that I work with, these are the shamans or people who know in the communities where I work. This is exactly what they do. Like they will talk from their perspective, but then they will also help foreign audiences to understand by way of comparison or references to scientific, sort of translation of what they're talking about. And often that type of role is like really striking, like it really resonates, on multiple levels and creates openings for people to be able to dialogue or accept or at least enter into that sort of realm. So those are all the ideas floating around in my mind. Alice, you have something in the chat. Why don't you bring that up?
Yeah, because earlier in my grad school journey, I was interested in arts integrated learning, but looking deeper into it, like how to even practically use it in a way that doesn't create extra workload for teachers. It is the level of integration is important. Like, are we dealing with multi, inter, or transdisciplinary? So multi is just like bringing two together, but no conversation or actual connection is being built, but just like putting these together, maybe some connections, like people like, oh, this happens here and this happens here, that's it, end of discussion. And inter is maybe utilizing one of the other discipline to think about this other discipline. And then transdisciplinary is creating like a new discipline together, like merging two disciplines together. And I think that goes back to what Vicky and I'm sorry, is it Dr. Byer? Is it?
That's
I'm
my,
sorry.
it's,
Yeah.
I'm muted. I am on my wife's computer, so her name is Bayer and my name is Hermson, and Terry is just fine.
Okay. As Terry has said, like it's so there's our higher education is so fixated on these specific disciplines, and then I feel like the biggest issue with building such like even interdisciplinary studies or programs in the higher education is that it would be too disruptive of the original disciplines, and which is good, which is inherently good, but too much work and maybe not everybody is on board. And I don't know. It is very complicated. And it's not to say that students don't benefit from it, but from some studies where students do build this sort of interdisciplinary program for themselves, such as like taking double majors or minors in different areas, different focuses, in seemingly unrelated, like in STEM students taking, who are also dance minors. And they actually say that they're making that interdisciplinary, um, I don't know, encounter for themselves. They're like borrowing like the ways of thinking, like innovative ways of thinking through dancing into their own STEM research and ways of thinking. So like kind of breaking away from the really scientific way of linear thinking, which sometimes can be kind of boxed in. I don't know, I'm not a STEM person, so but yeah, that's like some of what the students have reported that they kind of had to do that for themselves. So I don't know, maybe there could be ways that the institution can be more supportive of those kind of explorations, or yeah, I don't know. How do we even do
I
that?
I wish that the only issue were that it's a lot of work, right? But I don't think that that is the issue at all. I think that there's some stakes involved here, um, and also potentially kind of a myopic forecast, right? So like being able to think about what is the vision for the implications of multi, inter, or transdisciplinary type of approaches, and maybe just eliminate the word discipline altogether, right? But I think that the stakes are much higher than just people are deterred by the amount of work that it would take. So I don't know. Does everybody else think about that?
I just have to jump in. I think we've hit on a real nerve here of where how unlearning could be fostered, and I get this from your students, Michelle, but I think it's that divisionness. I think it's not easy. I think it's, as an artsy person, I could probably, wax poetic about climate change or about the need for action on climate change. But if I don't know my facts, if I don't know stuff, then I'm going to be just kind of like, oh, we should do something. But the problem being, I mean, David Orr has said for years, decades, that higher education is actually the problem, not the solution. It's our division of things into these little boxes, and I'll take care of my geology and digging and finding ways to frack and finding ways to do tar sands extraction. But they're not. There's no moral or visionary sense of I can get this done. You can build this gigantic machine to strip the land, boreal forests from Western Canada, and feel no pain in having those forests removed because the discipline of those people that they were taught in colleges, in graduate schools and PhD programs to learn how to do that has no mechanism for testing what is going on here with the destruction of the land. So I'm thinking of the movie called Before the Flood, where Leonardo DiCaprio is going around and he's up in a helicopter with a guy who's. Has anybody else seen this scene? It's my students just get overwhelmed by it. They're up in a helicopter and the guy's pointing out, see, yeah, that's where it's been stripped, and here's where the oil's collecting, and here's where the sands. And Leonardo DiCaprio said, looks like Mordor. And the guy goes, what? Has no reference point for Lord of the Rings or Tolkien's visionary ecological stance. He has no way to see that land other than through the lens of his discipline, which has taught him we can do this. We can strip that all off there and we'll get this dirty oil and then we'll ship it. So I think in some ways it goes to the heart of how much we have to unlearn if we're going to actually build, if we're going to deal with the planetary crisis here, we're going to have multidisciplinary approaches to it. And I sound kind of angry, but I am.
So maybe I'll bring in just to be cautious about our generalizations. I hear, like the institutional, architecture and higher ed, but also my experience has been of a lot of interdisciplinary conversations and collaborations, initiatives that are created specifically to bring those conversations together. So I think, for example, about my participation in the STEAM Factory, the Global Arts and Humanities Discovery Themes on Humane Technologies and Livable Futures that were brought together by the Advanced Center for Computing for the Arts and Design. Those have been incredible opportunities and challenges, right? To talk across these disciplines and to think about these problems in more global, interconnected sort of ways. So as we critique the institution, I also want to recognize these spaces because our colleagues are so brilliant, right? Like, I don't think that we're necessarily like one-track mind people, but we're struggling with a big structural and human problems. They're very complex, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, but there are spaces, is all I'm saying. There are spaces where these conversations come together. Now, I don't know if there are few, if they're marginalized spaces, if they are increasingly present spaces. But just to give you another example of social sciences potentially coming into this discussion very centrally with the support of the institution in whatever capacity, is the issue of race and diversity, right? So diversity, inclusion, racial justice that now has threads into different colleges, different disciplines, different classrooms. So yeah, I don't know if I would generalize just completely, but I see the problem. I definitely see the problem and more work to be done.
No, I think it's wonderful you're bringing that up because I actually I went to Ohio State, in PhD land, but what I'm seeing from the discovery themes and the kind of things that being brought out in the STEAM Factory and Nick Kawa's class yesterday, where he's an anthropologist, but he's also looking at how to recycle, use the use of plastics, and he showed us one of the models he had. So I think exactly that's the kind of growing past the disciplines that I think we can applaud and then build on. So yeah, absolutely, I'm seeing that at Ohio State. I don't think I'm seeing it at Harvard, but hey, what do I know? Um, but I agree. Let's not overgeneralize. We've named the problem, and now I think you're saying where some solutions are starting to happen, even if, right in our midst.
But I like what you said, Terry, about the need to bring in morals. And I was thinking about whether it be at the high school level or whether it be at the undergrad level. There are medical ethics classes, there are ethics of law classes in the law schools, there is ethics in political science, ethics in economics. The problem is that to graduate, I don't know of universities that say you have to take an ethics course, not just bioethics, medical ethics, but ethics themselves. And instead of tailoring it to one specific discipline, why are students not introduced to the idea or introduced to what ethics are in the first place? I know, and I'm an elementary school teacher. Well, I'm a middle school teacher grade 7, 8. I know that with my particular school board, they don't touch ethics because it always gets mixed up with religion. And people say, "Oh, now we're into that sort of land of, well, we're not going to agree on things." It's like, okay, but are we teaching ethics to students? Are we teaching an ethical way? Well, we're teaching a religious way. It's like, I'm talking about ethics. And I think that, when students graduate from university, they know their discipline. They just don't know the morals and the obligations around that discipline. Well, not all of them, but a lot don't understand the limitations of their discipline and the consequences of their discipline.
Yeah, and I wonder, I wonder as we think about this, if the broader question has to do with just the entire concept of education, right? Like the nature of education itself, right? And something else, and I can't remember if it was Vicky that you mentioned it or Peter, but at some point somebody mentioned something about jobs, right? And so that might be another area to think about, is like, what is the relationship between academia, and the university and the corporate sector? Are we just producing students for jobs, and how does that change the way that we go about our educational system and the types of content and curricular material that we include?
Yeah. Yeah, Michelle. And if you read Marx, that's what Marx would say. That's what our education system is set up for, to train the proletariat. But Peter, I've got a question for you. I'm hearing what you're saying about ethics being too close to religion. And a lot of times I will bring into my class, but since I'm at the university level, it might be okay. Can we say all religions have some wisdom, and here's a quote from the Talmud, and here's a quote from Buddhism, and can we say that without teaching religion? Rather than no religion, can we just say all religion? Is that possible in the primary, the elementary, middle schools?
Well, I teach in a Catholic board, so we are, religion is infused into, there is a religion program. The problem, I don't want to become too, idiosyncratic about this, but it seems to me that we are teaching examples, but we are not teaching a method, a way of thinking. And I'm not suggesting that every student that comes in here become a devout Catholic, or every student that comes, becomes a devout Buddhist, but we give examples. Well, here's an example of where we would do the moral versus the immoral thing, but we're not teaching students to think in a moral or ethical way. We just give them examples. And when there is no example to relate, I think the student twists in the wind. That's, and I may be wrong. It's entirely possible that my experience with students has been completely wrong. That others have a different way, but I just have felt that through elementary school into high school, and even what I've seen with my own daughters in university is they learn things, and they can form an ethically correct conclusion, come to an ethically correct conclusion. But I still question, is that because they were taught related to the discipline, or is it because they have a strong ethical understanding? And I think there's a difference. I worry about the student that can't make the decision because, I don't know. I don't know how to relate it. It's like, well, what's your ethical base?
Well, this may come back around to our experience in our class, Terry, and Alice, maybe. Absolutely, in the context of our curators group, right? So, two things that you said, Peter, were an ethics course, like a singular ethics course, right? And an example. So, this idea of like singular approaches, right? Check, done the example or have done the course, are extremely problematic, right? They are not in the mind frame of ongoing engagement with education as a lifelong type of endeavor, and certainly not about like pathways or ways of thinking, right? Which require practice. So it's not about knowing that it exists. It's not about reading about it. It's about putting it into practice and then rehearsing it, right? Multiple times in order to gain a better understanding of what the concept is in the first place, you know, to integrate it into the way that you do things, bring things in as a method or a practice within your own um, spheres. So Alice, I think we definitely try to do that, you know, in our curators group. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around ethics and religion and all that because I'm personally not a religious person. And then in my this may be entirely unrelated, but yeah, I've been dealing with my students who really wish I talk about religion, but I don't know how to go into it and then not, bring up, religious oppression and issues with power. And then the idea of ethics, I think it's I don't know if there is like a singular approach of teaching ethics because it's very, very much embedded with our own different cultural backgrounds, our different belief systems, well, not necessarily belief, but our own individual belief system. So maybe there could be parallels, as Vicky has talked about, maybe like different, value systems has similar teachings, but it's I don't know how do we approach it in a way that's like, okay, so this is the ethics that you should follow and not, going entirely um yeah, how do you teach it without interrogating the value system that you're coming from.
So
Yeah.
Maybe inquiry, you know. So Terry,
yeah,
going back to our class, you know, like it's not about the answers. It's just about the way that you would go about questioning and wondering and engaging in a curious way these very difficult questions without necessarily coming to a conclusion about it, but feeling more comfortable in the realm of asking those questions.
well, I'm thinking of this one student who was sitting near me during the class, and she's a chemistry, I'm not sure, chemistry or but she's taking minor in Spanish. And it seems to be, and she said, this is the classes I look forward to because the other ones I'm just regurgitating, I'm just gathering information. There's no reflective, I don't know if it has to be moral, there's no reflective time. What is chemistry doing? And I think that's the curiosity, build investigation, curiosity. What do we do with these chemicals when we create them, when we study them? Um, I just I agree with you, Michelle, that I think that there are plenty of wonderful people doing what do you call it, Alice? When it's the best thing, trans.
Transdisciplinary is like where it creates its own discipline. So that's like a new discipline. But I think interdisciplinary is pretty much like what people have been doing, a little bit more
But
approach.
I feel like the tightness that that student is describing doesn't allow for investigation. And I'm thinking of an example that just drives me crazy. We were trying to do something with fostering a conservation corridor on Allen Creek that runs through Otterbeins campus. And we were trying to build a case to the city that some of the development be mitigated through bioswales and things like so that the runoff, even if you're going to do the development, at least you do something to protect it from just messing with the creek. So I went to one of a mussel expert at Otterbein. He's known all over the state and he takes his students into Allen Creek to study the mussels. And I asked him for a statement to take to the city about the need for protecting riparian health in the rivers. And he wrote back to me, says, that's not in my territory. I study mussels. I don't know enough about riparian to speak about the health of riparian systems. And I actually liked this guy. But when he said that, it was like, okay, there's that discipline without connection, with like a science, but no no, I don't know, Peter, if it's moral or if it's just inquisitive or just caring about the planet. I couldn't believe it was just really write me off. We needed an expert to say, yes, this is valuable, and he wouldn't give us a statement. And to me, that's the opposite of what you're talking about, Michelle, with people building the what the steam factory is doing.
But people may or may not, you know, do this. So it's unpredictable and about why people take positions. And I think that interdisciplinary conversation is about understanding, right? How do people come to these conclusions? How do they position themselves both within academia and within society, right? To really try to understand. I'm curious, like, why did this person answer this, right? If there's like a legitimate scientific reason for this, or if it's just a disconnected situation, like you're saying, you know, it's very hard to sort of jump to conclusions. And we find ourselves, especially like in the territory of talking about indigenous cultures, in a tricky territory of sometimes positioning ourselves in an advocacy, you know, sort of situation, and other times for very good reasons not doing that, or not doing that right now, or in a particular context. And it may come under attack, right? Of saying, why are you not stepping up and advocating for this? But I do think that there's sort of like a rigor in the investigation that has to happen in order to come to better positions, right? So I don't know how to answer that or how to understand your friend Terry. I'd love to have that conversation. It looks like Vicky wants to jump in.
Yeah, Terry, I feel your pain. That's why I am where I am. But I would suggest if you haven't talked to someone in the School of Environment and Natural Resources, try that, because they try to connect the biological and social science, environmental and social sciences. So the people that I work with that's just what they want to do, is say, we have to protect these mussels, and we have to do it by doing this and this and this. So yeah, please check, and maybe I can even put you in touch with someone. I want to see it happen.
No, thank you, because the issue's not gone. We're trying. It's been dragged out, and that's exactly what we need. But see, I'm seen as the touchy feely guy. Oh,
Yes,
climate change is real. We should do something about it. You
yeah,
know, and I'm trying to educate myself like crazy, but I can't cover all those grounds, and I just don't understand why people in disciplines that are deeply connected to healthy muscles don't care about the ecological repair. I mean, I even know the word riparian. I know what a riparian environment is now. But he's not thinking about it. And that to me, that's just the little niche kind of thing. I agree. I probably maybe he sees, well, then I'm going to be seen as I'm claiming expertise when I don't have that expertise.
Well, I wonder, you know, so it kind of comes back to this relationship, you know, between academia, art, society, advocacy, and what the stakes are in each one. You know, what are like, if we have a vision of like, what are the consequences of those types of connections or relations, um, and just allowing ourselves to sort of play that out and follow those threads, you know, in conversations that get pretty complex, I think. Yeah.
A year ago, I read a book by Tom Nichols, who was a professor of political science at the Naval War College, and his book was titled "The Death of Expertise," and his argument was that really we should acquiesce to the expert. So if we acquiesce to the muscles expert, you know, we can't expect anything more out of them. Now, Nichols viewed that as a strength. He actually viewed that as a strength. He said, yeah, they shouldn't stray out of their lane. And it's like, that's a pretty narrow lane we're in. And, oh yeah, they shouldn't, you know, we shouldn't be worrying about the implications. We just need to rely on expert after expert after expert. I'm not sure you can coordinate all those experts. And when I first read his book, I got halfway through his book and I went, oh, you've got some solid points. And then he went into this diatribe of, you know, trashing the humanities, trashing the social science. We have enough art historians in the world. We don't need any more. We don't need more experts. I was shocked. I just thought it was completely, weakly opinioned, but also, the idea that an expert, we should acquiesce to the expert and not expect anything more out of him. What a way to go through life. And that's what you're facing, Terry, with the muscles guy. He's an expert in that, can't comment on anything else. I don't know where you go.
That's just an example. But to go back again to this marvelous class we had, the students were seeing these very powerful way of seeing things as integrated. How do we move from this splintered Western? I mean, I guess we have all kinds of pluses because of all the specializations. But where do we raise the big questions about how to make societies that work in ecological systems that are, it's not going to just happen through the experts fixing it all up.
Yeah, I mean, so many potential answers to that question, right? But I wonder if, in the absence of consensus, right, or just not taking consensus for granted, if diversity of voices and diversity of perspectives is an important step.
Yeah, and one thing that part of my class is the lecture on Mondays, and what the part I love the most is the discussion on Wednesdays, when they're broken into smaller groups and we discuss things and we start with questions, and the conclusions these students always come to, and yeah, I lead them a little bit, is that we have to start with values, with values, and we get that in younger children. So Peter, what you're doing is, if you can, there's Peter. Okay, if Peter can, I don't see Peter.
I think he may have had a class to go to,
Okay.
but he
Yeah.
always views the recording afterwards.
All
So I
right.
think you're going to keep
Yeah.
talking to him.
Okay. Well, anyway, just reaching these young children and asking them questions and making them think, and then they have to confront their own ethical system when this happens. And that's what the students in my class are doing. And yeah, that's.
Yeah, I agree, Vicki. My favorite parts are, and in fact, Alice knows, from our forums, it is all about reflection. It's all about talking together and also working together collaboratively, right? But most importantly, and it's sort of taking the lessons from our curators group, Alice, and bringing that into other classrooms. I think it has to do with creating a space that is safe enough for students to experiment and explore those possibilities, and to try it and then try it again. At first it may be awkward, but if they know that it's not the only time and that they're on the spot to perform, then they allow themselves, to just take on, slightly different perspectives and different roles and explore those, knowing that they're going to have another opportunity to try it. And I would say that the ability to embrace the values or practice, those things, comes over the course of time with a support system. So this is all about our curators group, Alice, like just thinking about how we support each other, how we allow people to progress at their own pace, how we respond when people need help or assistance with something, knowing when to jump in and when to just clear out of the way or clear the path somehow, right? And I love it. It's a sort of a balance between really listening to what people need and being sensitive, like developing that sensitivity. And my feeling is that translates into the way that we operate in a broader world vis-a-vis, in our case, Indigenous cultures, right? That sensitivity and that ability to listen to each other, we have to cultivate that in our own circles before we're able and practiced enough to even pretend to do it with others, right?
So I want to acknowledge that Kadine's name at least has appeared on the stream, and she's in a car somewhere on her phone. Or I wonder if we could catch Kadine up on what we've been
I'm
talking
so
about because it
sorry.
comes. No, it's fine. We've been talking about something very close to what your work is about, bridging sciences and art. So I wondered if we could catch you up for the last 10 minutes and see what you, um, how you might respond.
Uh,
You're muted.
I'm so sorry. I'm just jumping in now, and I will catch up with the film, with the video of this session. I'm very curious to know about the conversation.
Can anybody I
And
mean, I could try to summarize real quick because it came out of the class that you had with Michelle's students
which
yesterday.
was really inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes to, I'm hard to do this really quickly, but the division between science and art seeming touchy-feely, and you could say that climate change, we need to do something about climate change, but if you don't have some substance, then the people who have substance don't want to deal with the emotional and the um and that's what that one student was saying, that in her chemistry classes she gets pretty much just all content and facts and doesn't get a chance to reflect on the application. And I was actually, before you jumped on, going to bring up the gallery where you are tapping into knowledge, not just making a pretty picture, but actually building it from the combination of scientific, you could say it's scientific investigation of sound as it relates to human emotion. I don't know if that's enough of, of an entry point. But actually, that I was going to ask, what would we say about the gallery as an example of not one or the other, but the two in some ways being brought into conversation with each other?
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the context that I'm coming into with this conversation. I just heard the end of what Michelle was talking about. But it is definitely an investigation. This is on many levels of sound, of, some sciences, chemistry.
So it looks like Kadeen has frozen on us a little bit, but we are kind of putting her on the spot
We
to
are, but
respond.
it's odd because I was going to bring this up because she couldn't be here, and it seemed like it would be applicable since we're talking about the seeds,
Right.
from the gallery.
So
Is
here's what I have to say, maybe Terry, to your point, and I'd love to hear from Alice in these last few minutes also about this idea of creating a space, that is conducive to a different type of interaction, starting right there at the local level, right? But I think that just thinking about what that conversation with the student, that is in the lab and kind of regretting that she doesn't have more opportunity to be more reflective about it, that we need to expose students, to a diversity of experiences that broadens their concept of research, right? That research is not something that happens in the lab, right? That there are many, many different ways of going about it and many different forms of inquiry. So just that, just broadening that already, I think, sort of brings students into a conversation in a different way, you know? And then also thinking about a balance between, investigating, like we read that quote, Alice, about the this investigative cloud that just sort of when it went, it's sort of it's an extractivist, sort of approach, right? The kind of like this oscillating thing between getting the facts, investigating the rigor of research, redefining research, right? But at the same time, maintaining that wonder about the world, and that creative, sort of embracing of the world. So I don't know. I want to, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking like throughout listening to Terry's situation about the muscle researcher, and then also with Peter talking about, experts, death of experts, all that, and then this idea of curiosity-driven inquiry. I think maybe it's not ethics, but empathy that is like at lost here, because that muscle professor, maybe, being aware of one's limitation of knowledge, right? Being honest about one's lack of knowledge possibly is one thing, is being respectful, but then just not even having to even thinking about reflecting on one's positionality and thinking about what they can offer from their perspective is indifference, and that's like lack of empathy. So that, and going back to Kadeen, I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Sorry.
That's fine.
About the seeds, and then thinking about scientific, like these really clinical issues, and then bringing back how this affects the land, and then the people who live on it, who interact with seeds and all that, these kind of emotions is kind of trying to evoke empathy, right? Get us connected back to these issues, these topics, right? I don't know. And then, yeah, how do we thought, and then going back to like creating spaces for that kind of wondering, that kind of being able to explore beyond these very strict disciplines that is disconnecting, right? I do think, like when I was talking about the transdisciplinary situations, or the difficulties in higher education, I do think that Indian and Amazonian curatorial group does offer that space for exploration. I do think that is very supportive of that, as we see with Cameron. I don't know if Cameron ever joined this group, but yeah, he's a great example of one who comes from biology, right? Biochemistry or biology?
It's biology, yeah.
Yeah, and then he's so passionate and interested in the Andean mythology, and then he has so much care for the stories, the experiences, and the artifacts we have in our collection. Yeah, I would be super interested in learning how he thinks interdisciplinary about that, and his biology background. It would be so interesting.
Well, it's interesting because I think that for him it was a realization of like, oh wow, this can be research too. Like, can this count as research? So it was sort of a moment that he came into there, and then little by little, creating a space where he could become an expert, in what he's doing, or develop expertise, let's say, right, in what he's doing, with extremely rigorous sort of reading. This kid has read like now it's like over 40 books, um, on his own. It's not a demand of the group. It's not, nobody required this or anything, just on his own, and feeling more and more confident, so much so that now he's launching an interdisciplinary discussion forum among undergraduates. So it's an undergraduate initiated discussion forum. So this is extraordinary, and he's a sophomore. No.
Yeah. I love that. I love a couple of the terms, since we're coming close to the end. That the creating a space of inquiry seems like a really useful concept. And I kind of think of Kadeen's Gallery as a place of inquiry. What are these sounds? What are the seeds? What happens if we listen to them more carefully? Not telling people how to listen, but asking, inviting. And then, Alice, your phrase of empathy, opening up empathy. you know, and that guy flying over the tar sands, looking down and having no concept of what happened to the arboreal forests. There's no empathy there. There's a lot of knowledge of how to rip up the land, but there's not much empathy on what happens to the land and the cultures underneath it. So I'm going to take away those terms. Useful. It seems useful.
And how does empathy lead to action? I mean, what is the action behind that? Acknowledging those moments, and how do we agree on that somehow? I don't know.
I love this connection, Kadeen. Right on. And so maybe we can keep these threads, you know, going in our conversation as we come to our end of our hour. And just to respect Richard's perspective on being very strict about the time and keeping it to 1 hour, we'll sort of wrap it up, but keep these threads of spaces of inquiry, empathy, and how empathy relates to action. No? So yeah. No care. What is that?
I was responding to Carrie's statement of how there is no empathy from the guy flying over
Yeah,
and seeing the Mordor. He basically does not care. He has no. Yeah, that's what I was trying to
yeah.
say.
Well, thank you all for making the time today, you know, to just sort of get together. I think it was a really provocative discussion and an opportunity to sort of circle back and think about the experiences with the classes. Kadeen, we're so grateful for your time, for coming to spend that time with our students. And we
Thank
look
you. It was so
forward
inspiring.
yeah, we look forward to the upcoming visits and some of the follow-up visits that trickled out of those initial contacts. So everyone have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again next Friday for our Unlearning Hour.
Thanks so much. Sorry for being late.
No, no worries. Bye-bye.